Good day, I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holacek, and again I come to you from my hermitage. I'm a Thomas Jefferson scholar, but today I'm not going to talk to you about Thomas Jefferson, but I'm going to relate to you a sort of Jeffersonian story about one person's quest for and love of liberty, and that is the story of my maternal grandfather, Michael Chemny, a Ukrainian who came to this country early in the 20th century in search of freedom for himself and his family. When my mother died on June 22, several years ago, my cousin Stephen Fidak threw onto my lap, in the laps of my two brothers, a partial translation of my grandfather's book, which was, as you can see on the wall, which was titled Potop, which is customarily he had translated as Trampled Dreams, and I've taken some liberty and changed the title. But it was his autobiography written in Ukrainian, and it was self-published and had limited readership, of course, as any self-published book usually does. And when I came to look at the partially translated manuscript, I, of course, had a copy of the Ukrainian book in my hand for several years, and not being very good with Ukrainian, I didn't do much with it other than look at the pictures. But when I came to read the partial translation, about a third of the book had been translated, it came to grip me, and I had come to terms with my Ukrainian heritage. I'm an American. I was born here and cultured in the United States, but I'm completely of Ukrainian blood. And at some point, reading the partially translated manuscript enabled me to come to grips with my past, with my Ukrainian past. And this is, I think, a very relevant story, given the circumstances, the parlous circumstances today in Ukraine, and the extraordinarily difficult situation that's going on right now. So what I want to do is talk to you today about this book, about this man, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, whom I consider to be, and today I consider him to be a great man. So what I propose to do the rest of the way is just to read. I'll show you my cleanup job on the book. It's called The Oath by Michael Chemny, Quest for Freedom in War-Torn Ukraine. It's a wonderful story, and I'd like to share it with you, and I'll give you the opportunity, if you'd like to purchase a copy hereafter, if you find it as gripping as I did. I'll give you an email address where you can contact me. Okay. Let me, in what follows, simply read for you from the introduction. I think it's a nicely written introduction, and it'll tell you, in part, the story of my maternal grandfather, Michael Chemny's quest for freedom. The oath is about one man's paradise lost, a man robbed of a way of life. Life in Chomyakivka, this is a small village in Ukraine, about 200 households, and it's still equally as small today, was for Chemny Elysium. Work is exhausting but rewarding, and there are numerous breaks in the yearly work cycle through religious holidays. There is a healthy, clean regularity to the year, to daily affairs, and even to religious holidays, which sometimes last 3 weeks, the length of celebrating a typical wedding. Valladic life is harsh, yet simple, and for Chemny, happy. When it's time to work, the villagers work. When it's time to play, they play, and they play with the same intensity, even strenuousness with which they work. Chemny comes early on to recognize the great beauty of living simply and of comity. He seems to say during times of great misfortune that the aim of life, the beauty of life, is sharing sorrows to lighten their load, which I add is a very Epicurean sentiment. But his fellow villagers never come to grips with that recognition, the notion of the beauty of life. Chemny comes to adopt a working man's ethics. founded on the notions of devotion to God, respect for tradition, working hard, living simply and honestly, loving and serving the motherland, Ukraine, and helping others to endure inevitable hardships and misfortune. I offer in what follows several instances. He begins his book with an account of his shared adventures with his maternal grandfather, Roman, who would take him into the woods to pick berries, read stories to him, and play with him. Chemny was 5 at the time, or younger. His grandfather passed while he was still a boy. Chemny paints a vivid picture of the funereal pageantry, the procession where he and his family walk behind the coffin, and the entire village of Chomyakivka comes to pay their respects, and the gilded coffin, a present of the prince of the region. Chemny writes, like the man larger than life, his funeral was majestic. I remember it still, as if it were now happening. It is still fresh and vivid in my memory. 3 priests were reading from the Bible as the grand coffin, framed with gold and a gift from Prince Lubomirsky, was being pulled by 4 regal horses. Everyone from Chomyakivka attended the funeral. My father, mother, other relatives, and I proudly but sorrowfully walked behind the coffin. The rest of the townspeople followed. His maternal grandfather was to Chemny a great man, and that event changed his life. Now, the funeral is described with such detail, found in few places in the book, and certainly a sign of the boy's love for his grandfather and the pain he felt on his passing. How long and frequently he must have cried after the loss. It is likely a loss from which he never recovered, one which catapulted him to manhood much too early. Now, Chemny throughout is a traditionalist, not a revolutionist or a revisionist. He loves Ukraine and Ukrainians' way of simple Vladic living, and he's willing to die for his motherland under Polish oppression at the time. His description of inscription into the Ukrainian Army in chapter 18 and how he felt after the oath he swore with his fellow soldiers and before the priests and God is heartrending. I read of his account of the oath, which is the title I gave to the book. I was no longer standing on the ground, but I was somewhere in heaven, and I was the happiest of all people in the world. At that moment, I fully experienced my whole being. It was something that I cannot now express in words, perhaps something that cannot be captured by words. I can say that it was the happiest moment in my life. Never before had I experienced such bliss and mental well-being, and I cannot expect I shall ever experience such a blissful moment. With that oath, my world widened. Eternity was, in a sense, captured in a flicker of time. And to this day, I mumble in my heart and head the gist of the oath and shall take that memory to my grave. I can only think that the Ukrainian president feels something of the same, that his willingness to die, represent the people and die on their behalf is a blissful moment for him too. So too the brave soldier prior to his island being bombed, who told the Russians who bid him to surrender to go fuck off. Now, one cannot help being envious of a person if only still a very young man, and even if the passage is an expression of very great naivete, who had experienced such a moment. I never have, and I suspect that few of us have experienced such a moment, a transformational moment of his oath. Chemny is simple-minded, perhaps even naively so. His love of God and religious tradition are unconditional. He finds meaning, even profound beauty, in simple agrarian work. He recognized the absurdity of war. Decent people can be moved to unspeakable, almost discretionary violence, yet he recognized its necessity, if only to try to preserve a way of life uniquely Ukrainian. Yet through the early chapters, we become aware of the fragility of life in his Vladic Ukraine, in his beloved Chomyakivka. World War I forever ends all hopes of happiness. A man of large passions and of deep courage, his dreams, though simple, could only have been trampled or proven deceitful over time in Ukraine. hence the notion of the title, as you see there, Potoptani Mri, meaning either trampled or something like deceptious or deceitful. We feel Chemny's pain as he struggles to come to grips with the atrocities and the twists of fortune during war. We feel Chemny's indignation at the looting done by fellow Ukrainians on their own people in the town of Tismanitsia at the bidding of Russian Cossacks, but share his sense of pride as he, refusing to be a part of the thievery, walks home from the ugliness without participation in it. We feel Chemny's sense of beauty when he describes the music of the scythes, the music of metal, as the Ukrainian laborers reap the oats, rye, and wheat. We feel Chemny's pride as he swears an oath before God to fight for Ukrainian freedom, even at the cost of his life. We feel Chemny's profound shame when he talks about Ukrainian deserters in the war with Poland, some 60 of whom were from his village. We feel Chemny's disappointment that the village priest, Father Derdello, leaves the village for the mountains when he loses faith in the villagers. We feel Chemny's authenticity as he refuses a post in the Polish government, a post which would have made him a wealthy man, to manage unsettled Ukrainian affairs. It's astonishing that through it all, with everything that he suffers, he keeps himself together. That he does so is likely the consequence of daring to have a dream and to follow it at any cost. Chemny is a boy who is forced by misfortunes to be a man much too soon, but that might have been common among boys in the villages of Ukraine at the time. Nothing really exceptional. That is something that most of us today just will not be able to understand. Many of us today have no desire to grow up. We wish to extend our childhood as far as is possible in adulthood. We work but find no meaning in work, and we work only to have time to play. We want the thrill, the excitement, the kick of jumping from an airplane, owning and driving a sporty vehicle, or climbing a mountain. The world in which we live is too different from that of Chemny's world. The Polish occupation of Ukraine and numberless Polish atrocities forced Chemny to leave his beloved Ukraine in search for a new paradise. And so he comes through negotiations, illegal negotiations, to come to the New World. Yet the New World proves radically different. Though the story is much the same, his dreams in America will never be fully realized. They cannot be, for America is not Ukraine, and Detroit, in which he finally settles, and the story about his coming to Detroit is unbelievable. It's remarkable. A series of mistakes and accidents that gets him to the United States. Detroit is not Chomyakiivka. Chemny does settle in Detroit, but he has difficulty finding work. When he does find work, it generally involves lengthy shifts and often requires working the afternoon or night shift, unanticipated shifts, change of shifts, and insufficient pay. And such things make impossible his dream of finishing school and becoming an engineer. In one factory, he's working for something like 70 cents an hour and working brutal hours in shifts and working in the cold. Then there are the many lean years, the Great Depression, in which Chemny often goes days with little to eat. At one point, he moves in with his uncle in Cleveland to take a job selling insurance in some effort to eke out a living for him and his family. Well, the job, of course, pays poorly. Who's going to buy insurance when he's having difficulty putting food on his plate? And Chemny has to send his wife and children back to Detroit, where they can be with their parents so they can have food. He gets by selling all their furniture, and even that does not go swimmingly, as many purchasers agree to buy only if they can pay in installments, and they don't. Unable to get along with his uncle, an atheist with communist sympathies, he too eventually moves back to Detroit on Easter weekend. He's had enough. Now, during the lean years, Chemny works various jobs: labor at Packard Motor Company, labor at Ford Motor Company, teacher of Ukrainian at his church, and milkman. until he is hired by Schneider Tool, an engineering company, which proves to him to be an ideal job where he works dutifully until his retirement. All the while Chemny is in Detroit, he is much involved in Ukrainian political and religious affairs. The two are inseparable for him, and the political groups with which he works are religiously grounded. He works for Sikh, Motherland, Bulava, the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, the Native School, and the United Hetmans Organization of America. In all such groups, as he says, I was always picked for high posts. His work does not go unrecognized. On July 4, 1943, Reverend Bishop Konstantin Bohachevsky comes to Detroit and pays Chemny a visit. I slip in Jefferson because Jefferson was born on 17. Because of the date July 4 is an important date. On October 22, 1953, the Hetmanich Pablo Skoropadsky comes to Detroit and pays Chemny a visit. Each, of course, proves to be a singular honor. The Hetmanich, especially the leader of Ukraine, coming to his house. Those singular honors notwithstanding, the freedom he eventually finds in America once a citizen brings no happiness because it can bring no happiness. Deracinated in Ukraine by warlike atrocities, he cannot take root in America because he is a plant that requires Ukrainian soil. Hence, Chemny's choice of Trampled Dreams as his title. I close by returning to a point I make in the preface where I note two flaws in the autobiographical text: disregard of minutiae and Chemny's jaundiced eye. His book is certainly prejudiced from his own perspective, a religious perspective, political perspectives, and so forth. And they tend to polarize people. He tends to polarize people and events. You're a religious person, or you're a godless person. You love freedom, or you hate freedom. Yet those are mitigated once we realize that the book is more of a philosophical text than it is an autobiography. The theme throughout, as I have noticed, is that of a paradisiacal manner of living. He lives in his Ukrainian village in paradise. It to him is Elysium. He describes fully the paradise in chapters 2 through 10. This paradise is lost because of human greed, lust, desire, and worst of all, human ignorance, all inflamed by events prior to, during, and after the First Great World War. Much of the book, I should add here, centers on the atrocities of World War I, the Russian soldiers coming in, invading his Chemny, then the Polish army coming in and taking control over much of Ukraine and forcing him into the Polish army and other sorts of things. For Chemny, those human foibles are seemingly part of the nature of humans, as are their opposites: generosity, self-control, satiation, and knowledge. For Chemny, each man has to fight a war within himself, and those who win that war, the good men, in polar language once again, have to fight those who lose that war, the bad men. War between peoples thus is inevitable, though, so that there is some good in the world. Now, I close this little talk on my maternal grandfather with having read the preface. I hope you find it enjoyable in this time of singular atrocities of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I know most people are taken aback by this singular moment. I don't recite this for my own benefit or to show that somehow I am special or Ukrainians are special in the world. We're all special in the world. But as an American, I am proud to be an American, but I'm also proud of my Ukrainian heritage. I am proud of the fact that my grandfather had a story that I didn't tell here. He had gone through extraordinary experiences just to get to smuggle his way to Portugal, to get to Cuba, and somehow there try to get his way and find his way to Florida in the United States and make his way back up to Detroit, where his father-in-law lived. It's an extraordinary story, and it's a story that's not just a Ukrainian story, it's your story too. It's my story, it's your story, because as Americans, all of us, of all races and nationalities, have, I think, a similar story somewhere in our background. That's what makes it such a powerful book. I bring the book to your attention. It's called The Oath. The original title was The Trampled Dreams. I changed the title simply because I found my grandfather to be an extraordinary individual, a hero of mine, something I failed to recognize while he was alive. I only recognized, unfortunately, after his passing. If you'd like a copy of this book, I can get you a signed copy of the book for $25. It is filled with all sorts of pictures from his life in Chemny and life at Detroit. And those who have read a copy of the book told me they found it extraordinarily moving. It's the story of a great person, and we all have a similar story, as I said, in our family, somewhere in our history of people coming to America to find a better life. So as we struggle with the atrocities in Ukraine today and hope that we can find a peaceable solution, you might find some solace in reading this wonderful story of a very, very brave patriot, a dyed-in-the-wool Ukrainian who could not, in this wonderful world of America where there is freedom. I add, in a Facebook exchange with a pro-Russian person, he was talking about all the atrocities that the United States has committed over time, and I granted that we're certainly not innocents in this project. At one point, I saw a point of vulnerability. I asked this gentleman, are you living with all of his pro-Russian sentiments that we have a right to, Russia has the right to go in Ukraine, do what they want to do, because America has not behaved saintly. I simply asked this gentleman, are you living in the United States? He failed to answer. I asked again, do you write of America's atrocities from the United States, from the event? He failed to answer. And I said a third time. And I said, because if you are denigrating the United States while you live in the country, and I said to this gentleman, the one difference is, in the United States, you can live here and denigrate the country, its leaders, say whatever you want, and you won't get thrown in jail. In Russia, if you say things against Putin and other people, you do get thrown in jail. So whatever the faults of being an American are, one of the greatness of this country is that we still have freedom of expression, and freedom of expression brings with it certain problems, cyber attacks and all sorts of vulnerability to outside influence. That said, but that's what makes America great. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this somewhat lengthy talk, and if you are interested, send me an email at mholowchak@hotmail.com. That's MHOLOWCHAK. That's MHOLOWCHAK@hotmail.com. It's Marko Holochak in Ukrainian. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you decide to get a copy of the book, I think you'll love it. Thank you, and let's hope for world peace.